San Andreas, Metal Gear Solid 3, Shadow of the Colossus, all titans of the PS2 and bona fide classics, as well as close to perfect. But sometimes perfection is overrated, and you know all about those games anyway. For today, let's look at just some flawed, sometimes janky PS2 games that probably shaped a whole bunch of childhoods while never getting near the acclaim of the console's biggest names. But that's okay, you loved them. Strap in, you're in for a total trip back in time. Yeah, I can't explain what I actually mean by this, but I think about 80% of Arsenal fans have owned a copy of Spartan Total Warrior at some point in their lives. And I don't blame them. There's something deeply satisfying about a game that lets you mow down entire battalions of soldiers with a flaming sword while a Greek god whispers unsolicited advice in your ear, like a stock exchange bot on Twitter when you mention the plot of My Girl. Like, what are you doing here? Spartan Total Warrior is one of those games people remember not because it was polished or perfect, but because it made you feel like an absolute menace. Yes, it's technically sort of a God of War clone filtered through a Dynasty Warriors meets Total War experiment, and it's as cool as it sounds, but it's all pretty limited. The combat is pure button mashing and dodge rolling without much to it, and the camera occasionally forgets what it's supposed to be doing, like me when I look at the 18 different bread loaves at Asda. What's a seeded tiger gluten-free bread? Is that legal? But it absolutely goes for it. Every fight is a chaotic opera of limbs and shouting and additional shouting. The scale is bonkers for a PS2 title, with actual hordes of enemies charging at you with zero regard for your personal space. How bloody rude. It's ambitious, rough around the edges, but it's cool as hell. And if you were lucky enough to play it when you were definitely too young to, you'd fall madly in love with it. What? It's not a crime. A true crime. There's a very specific kind of PS2 game that bites off far more than it can chews it anyway, and then spits it out into our mouth like some kind of weird bird dad. And it's delicious, but it shouldn't be. True Crime Streets of LA is the poster child for pretty much that. This is a cop drama featuring Gary Oldman and Christopher Walken, in which you're solving crimes, engaging in third-person shootouts, and occasionally fist-fighting giant flaming skulls. All in a day's work for Detective Nick Kang, the coolest LAPD officer ever rendered in 480p. Let's not pretend this was some refined, polished experience though. The driving was quite floaty, the gunplay a bit clunky, and the story was like someone watched Rush Hour on loop with the subtitles off. Eurogamer said it could sometimes feel like forcing nails into your eyes and running over your own head with a traction engine. Alright mate, it's not Made Man, is it? And yet True Crime had this amazing energy, especially if you had never played GTA. The licensed soundtrack whipped, the city was huge for the time, and the sheer variety of things you could do made it feel like you were always 5 seconds away from some complete bollocks unfurling. Professional money hoarder Snoop Dogg was an unlockable character, I mean, come on. True Crime wasn't a masterpiece, but it did lead to a kinda even messier sequel in New York City, and spiritually, eventually, our beloved Sleeping Dogs. It may have left critics a bit conflicted, but we'll always love it. Now here's a forgotten PS2 banger that really said, what if the guys behind the Great Escape game made a Full Metal Jacket game with £5? A sequel to the similarly respected Conflict Desert Storm 1 and later 2, Conflict Vietnam dropped into the already overcrowded military shooter scene and tried to stand out by doing something different. It kicks your ass. You see, this wasn't your standard rah-rah point and make things die kind of shooter. You controlled 4 soldiers stuck deep in the Vietnamese jungle after everything goes predictably sideways. The squad-based setup involved switching between characters on the fly, issuing commands, and trying to keep everyone alive long enough to limp through to the next ambush. Of course, the AI often had its own ideas, usually involving standing directly in a mortar blast. Brilliant stuff. The reception was as murky as the eyesight of people who thought Platoon was a pro-war film. GameSpot gave it a 6.1. What an annoying score to give something, by the way. 6.1. Shut up. They called it solidly average and pointed to screwy controls, pacing problems, and a punishing save game system. The checkpoint situation alone could make a Buddhist monk snap. Visually, it wasn't much to look at either, brown, green, and misery being the dominant themes here. And yet, Conflict Vietnam really stuck with quite a few people. I remember playing this in my mate's basement and having just an eye-opening, kind of brutal, visceral time. His whole house, actually, come to think, it was like a whole basement. Weird. Conflict Vietnam was exhausting, confusing, and cruel. Just like war itself, he says, sat in his spare room with a fat cat snoring in the corner. Right, next game. What's so vexing about that? Ah, Vex. Tell me you wouldn't try and kill this dude with hammers if he appeared from around the corner. You would. You would. Some mascots have charm, some have attitude. Vex had a dead granddad. This was a platformer where your edgy goblin boy watches his grandfather get murdered in the opening cutscene and then strapped on a pair of demonic gauntlets. It's not exactly Banjo-Kazooie. Released in 2003 after work began as far back as 1999, which is quite a long time for back then. Vex is what happens when the studio behind Iggy's Wrecking Balls, hells yeah, is told to make something like Mario 64 for Evanescence fans. And to be fair, the actual platforming is solid here. There's tight jumps, big vertical levels, and decent variety across, your hub worlds. But ultimately, the devs were trying to make a platform that was just like stuck between eras of platformers, and it didn't make too much of a splash. Reviews said it was the best of the B-tier bunch, which means it wasn't quite Mario, but it was up there with the likes of, I don't know, Cow the Kangaroo? iNinja? Anyone? I loved me some iNinja. Still, if you played it at the right age, there's a good chance you thought Vex was the coolest thing since a spear from atop the ladder. It was challenging in ways a lot of its chirpier cousins weren't, and its world design had this eerie alien vibe that stuck with you. And hey, if the shop had run out of copies of Jak 2 back in the day, it'd more than do, right? Juiced was the street racer for people who thought Fast and Furious was a bit too subtle. Originally supposed to launch in 2004, this little beauty got caught up in the publishing limbo left behind by Acclaim's collapse. So THQ picked it up, delayed it, and by the time it finally screeched onto PS2 in mid-2005, the big dogs had already really been solidified. Underground 2 had shaped teenagers around the world, Midnight Club was basically the hipster's pick, Juiced, not exactly freshly squeezed. Still, it tried to be something a bit different. The respect system was pretty neat. Winning races wasn't everything, as you had to bet, build reputation, and earn the right to even challenge some crews who'd always awkwardly be represented by floating heads giving you some lip. It leaned hard into that early 2000s tunic culture that sold 1 million cans of Lynx Africa, complete with car customization that was extensive, if sometimes a bit pointless. Eurogamer gave it a 6 out of 10, saying it was good but sadly just not good enough to recommend you go out and buy it, and yet people did go out and buy it, and a lot of people loved it, because for all the dodgy AI, awkward menus, and rubber banding shite, Juiced was pretty fun and unashamedly 2000s. Yeah, it wasn't the best racer on PS2, but had a pretty neat look, and connected enough to get a sequel that came out on basically everything. But you know what, I really wish someone had the freedom to make more street racers these days. There's not enough of them. Oh hell yeah, I think this is the first time this game has been mentioned on this channel somehow. It's nuts considering I used to be in a Facebook group that asked for it to come back. In an era flooded with generic multiplayer shooters, Freedom Fighters felt fresh and brand new, like something never done or seen before. Ignore that. Released in 2003 by IO Interactive, yes, the Hitman lot and publishing masterminds behind Mind's Eye, it ditched the stealth and embraced guerrilla warfare. That means explosions. You played as Christopher Stone, a plumber who goes from fixing radiators to blowing up Russian propaganda centers with a ragtag militia, because of course he does. You built your squad by earning charisma points. If you liberated prisoners and captured bases, people literally queued up to follow you into battle. You could command up to 12 fighters by the end, and directing them in real time gave the game some strategy. It wasn't tactical like Rainbow Six, and it was more like, I don't know, Pikmin for psychos, but it was amazing. IGN gave it a glowing 8.4, praising how fun it was, but felt it could have been amazing with online multiplayer. That feels like a weird criticism for the PS2 in 2003, right? It would have been sick though. But Freedom Fighters is ultimately about storming a police station with Molotovs, shouting orders, and shooting things until they are dead, and I would kill for a sequel to this one. Roads won't forget. If GTA were thrown in the back of a Mad Max rig drenched in an industrial strength piss and left to bake until it got sunstroke, you'd end up with roadkill. The The developers saw you liked running things over in a sandbox in GTA and went, hey, more of that. Released in 2003, Roadkill blends open world chaos and carnage. It is basically GTA meets Twisted Metal. I'm pretty sure it even nicks some of the fonts from GTA 3. You're Mason Strong, a plague survivor turned machine gun turreted hero in a post-apocalyptic wasteland who's cruising through 3 anarchic cities and doing missions for gangs, scavenging parts and knocking down pensioners as you go. While it was definitely made quickly and cheaply, GameSpot probably nailed it best when they said it would send a PTA meeting into a panic with their 7.6 out of 10 review, calling it good. Metacritic reviews in general were good, just about. It wasn't slick, it wasn't subtle, it wasn't made for more than like 200 quid, and it certainly wasn't for everyone. But for those of us drawn to impalements, turbo boosts, and listening to Leo Sayer while you commit a lot of murder, it was very formative. It even chucked in things like hurricanes years before games like Just Cause 4. Is Roadkill as good as GTA? You know what, it's much better. No, of course not. But once you'd blown up as much of Vice City as you could, Roadkill was the ultimate guilty pleasure distraction for a few hours, and it was just really fun. Right, let's free ourselves from this entry. Oh man, a lot of people have forgotten about this beaut. Prisoner of War is a third-person World War II escape simulator from 2002 no, it's not The Great Escape. What makes you say that? You play as Captain Lewis Stone, who's imprisoned in a Nazi camp, so you're forced to sneak your way out using distractions, bribes, and scarcer-than-gold cigarettes. GameSpot gave it a 6.8, calling it a short but original and often entertaining game, with suspenseful sneaky gameplay and a strong dose of character interaction, even while noting some rough edges. Disappointing graphics, unconvincing AI, and the game's brevity, they said. That, by the way, was written by Greg Kasavin, who is the creative mind behind Hades. The more you know. The game does have a bit of a mixed reception overall, but I don't know man, for 2002 this felt super immersive and very, very ambitious. It was kind of like an immersive sim, kind of. Imagine Splinter Cell, but instead of doing splits, you're doing the rounds with your fellow prisoners and just gabbing away. You're calculating routines, trading candy for keys, and donning costumes in basically a sandbox. It's a stealth game that wants you to be smart and patient, and while that's a lot to ask of a soon-to-be teenage mind, I remember it properly blowing my mind back in the day. The PS2 can do this? It really was a big step up from the PS1. Right, gotta run. Next entry's coming up.
You are driving dangerously. Stop immediately.
Before GTA 3 reinvented open world games and started making boring people wet themselves with rage, Angel Studios, not long before they became Rockstar San Diego, dipped its toe into the chaos pool with Smuggler's Run. Released as a PS2 launch title in 2000, 25 years ago. Oh dear. Oh, that's not nice. It was part racer, part courier sim. You were bombing through forests, deserts, and snowstorms at 100 miles per hour, flinging contraband out the back of a buggy while helicopters chased you down. It was peak for a game from a quarter of a century ago. The maps were massive for the time, the physics were mental, and there was a great sense of momentum. The game even got a sequel the following year, which added more environments, more smuggling, more driving, and a bit more polish. But Smuggler's Run always had a proof of concept kind of vibe, you know. It was Rockstar figuring out how to do scale, vehicle handling, and things hitting other things at speed. Once GTA 3 dropped, the real show had started, and Smuggler's Run quietly kind of faded into cult memory. Smuggler's Run 2 actually came out a week after GTA 3, and I don't think many people played it at all, really. Critics at the time mostly liked that original game, but it really was just drive here, do a big jump, now drive somewhere else, for the majority of it. From a modern lens, the missions could blur into each other, and the game didn't have a lot of variety. Still, for a launch game, it was a pretty wild step up in terms of tech, and a game that ran so that others could run pedestrians over. Red card offence that, innit?
Under pressure again here. Solid pass. Mistime that one.
Look, sometimes, America, I want to talk about football. I have to channel my Tony Hibbert obsession into something healthy, the doctor says. Just bear with me on this one. The thing about red card is that it really isn't football as such. Anyway, years before Shaolin Soccer, we had red card, or the much more immodest red card 2003 in America. And imagine buying this game expecting a nice time with Brian McBride, and not realising it's actually more like this game. I will never forget that dude's face. Is he enjoying that? Does he? Fouls are encouraged, referees are ornamental basically, and then boost meter lets you unleash the Kraken at will. It's like the Mario football games if it was designed by, I don't know, Viz Comics? Who have you got over there? Mad Comics? I don't know. Critics were generally into the nonsense. GameSpot noted that it doesn't sacrifice the fun, easy to learn gameplay that most of Midway sports games possess. Metacritic in general has it in the mixed or average zone at a score of 73. It never really challenged PES, nothing did back in those days to be fair, or even FIFA, but there was something about Red Card that really stuck with you if you're a teenager who lived on Van Wilder and Equilibrium DVDs back in 2002. It's the kind of sports game from a mainstream publisher you simply wouldn't see today, at least without some kind of DLC for the dolphins. Oh yeah, you can play as dolphins in this one, and aliens. And monkeys. That's basically just scratching the surface of what a daft bit of arcadey brilliance this banger was. And while the awards bodies will never remember Red Card, the streets will never forget it, and so many other PS2 whippers. Are there any other 7 out of 10s or even possibly more flawed games on PS2 that you love? Well, let me know them down below. I've been Jimmy for Cultured Vultures. Those have been the PS2 games that the streets won't forget, and it's been good to have you. See you in the next one.